Hi, I'm Tim Brown of Football Archaeology, where we dig into football's past. Episode 3 covers another innovator whose contributions to the game go largely unrecognized by the college and pro football halls of fame. Today, we recognize Lloyd W. Olds, who invented the black and white striped officials shirt. We'll also look at alternatives to Olds' striped zebra shirt, which officials wore into the 1960s. To fully appreciate an innovation that became commonplace, we need to think about the world before Lloyd Olds' invention. So let's look at how football officials dressed when football began. Here's a print showing the Yale-Princeton game of 1878. The players wear light cotton tights, shirts, and beanies or stocking caps, while the referee, who is on the left, wears a brown frock coat, a bowler, a tie, and white pants. Many officials wore street clothes for decades after that, though they tended to wear older outfits due to the muddy field conditions. Here's some additional images of officials wearing street clothes while refereeing or officiating games. Besides street clothes, officials often wore college letter sweaters during games. Most officials early on in the game's history were former players who were respected, and by wearing their letter sweaters, they demonstrated to anyone in the crowd that they had played the game, they understood it, and they understood the game's rules. Also, since they typically handled games that did not involve their alma maters, wearing their letter sweaters reinforced their neutrality. Around 1910, basketball officials began wearing white shirts, often with bow ties, when they handled games. That practice carried over to football as well, especially in the South and on the West Coast, where warmer weather allowed officials to handle games in their shirt sleeves. At the time, wearing a white shirt for football made sense, since few teams wore white. Few teams wore white uniforms because they got dirty and did not wash well until artificial fabrics arrived in the 1930s. The widespread use of white by the away team didn't come along until the 1950s, when fans watching games on the black and white televisions of the day could not distinguish the team wearing the red jerseys from the team wearing blue jerseys, as they could when sitting in the stands. Despite the all-white officials' uniforms becoming more common, officials still dressed inconsistently. And as teams began wearing white, the white official's outfit became a problem. And that's where Lloyd Olds came to the rescue. Olds attended Ypsilanti Normal, which is now Eastern Michigan, just before World War I. He was a track athlete. He coached the reserve football team, and he also coached the high school basketball team associated with the normal school. So here's a few pictures of him during those days. After graduating, Olds worked in the Grand Rapids and Ann Arbor school districts before joining Eastern Michigan's faculty, where he stayed the remainder of his career. He became a nationally recognized track coach and was an assistant Olympic coach. All along the way, however, he refereed football, basketball, and track. There's an old story that Olds refereed a game between Michigan State and Arizona in 1920, when the Arizona quarterback, who wore a white jersey, mistakenly passed or handed the ball to Olds, who was wearing a white shirt. The problem with that story is that Arizona didn't play anyone from Michigan in the 1920s, so that part of the story is just a fable. Nevertheless, the premise of the story rings true, since Olds recalled events like that motivated him to ask a local sporting goods store to create a shirt unlike any worn by football and basketball teams of the time. The result was the black and white vertically striped official shirt that became known as the zebra shirt. The 1920s also saw football teams starting to wear vertically striped friction strips on the front of their jerseys, but those strips were wider And they seldom were black and white, as they were with the official shirt. So here's a picture of Olds modeling an official shirt a little bit further down the road. Olds began wearing his shirts, and others copied him. Since we've seen football, basketball, hockey, and wrestling officials wear black and white striped shirts for the past 100 years, we think of them as normal. But at the time, they looked quite odd. And that was the point. They were meant to stand out. They were meant to be unlike anything any team wore at the time. But that didn't stop fans from making fun of officials, often commenting that they looked like they had just left the state prison. Over the last 10 years, I've looked for early images of officials wearing these striped shirts, and the earliest I've found is one of George Varnell, a top West Coast official who handled multiple Rose Bowl games. And here's an image of him in the 1928 Cal-Stanford game. In time, Olds' zebra shirt became almost universal. So you might think that was the only design that was ever used. However, several alternatives emerged because support for officials wearing distinctive shirts coincided with the development of state and regional officiating organizations that trained and scheduled officials. Some associations and conferences adopted the zebra shirt in the 1930s, while others developed alternatives to indicate that the official had passed that group's tests and was certified by the regional body. For example, the Southern Football Officials Association went with a white shirt with a black collar and a stripe down the shirt's front zipper in 1932. Here's several images of the SFOA officials wearing those shirts. By 1941, the SFOA switched to a zebra-like shirt with vertical stripes on the torso and horizontal stripes on the arms, before adopting the standard zebra shirt in the late 1940s. Meanwhile, the Southwest Conference Officials Association designed a shirt with V-shaped stripes on the front and back. Again, here's some examples of their shirts. Unlike the Southern officials that switched to the zebra shirt in the late 1940s, the Southwest officials kept their V-striped shirts until 1968. It's worth noting about the mix of shirt designs that it impacted non-conference and bowl games. Before 1991, when the NCAA prohibited split officiating crews, games involving teams from two different conferences often had half the officiating crew come from one conference and the other half come from the other. And at times, they wore two different style shirts. The problem was that officials sometimes made questionable calls, and whichever shirt they wore drew attention to their conference affiliation. So that was considered problematic. Finally, the NFL tried different colored stripes for referees, umpires, and linesmen in the 1940s, but that approach provided no benefit, and they quickly dropped it. The path to football officials consistently wearing the black and white striped zebra shirt had multiple twists and turns, but all roads eventually led to Lloyd Olds' invention. So he deserves to be recognized for a startlingly simple and effective design that has stood the test of time. So that's it for this episode. If you enjoyed it, like, comment, and subscribe. And I'll be back soon with another video that digs into football's past here at Football Archaeology.